Hello, my name is Alex Clark, and I will be presenting on China's one-child policy. The one-child policy in China was implemented in 1979 and officially ended in 2015. Although it appears fairly straightforward and easy to grasp, it has many more nuances with deep ties to China's past. The policy ended in 2015, but its effects will still impose ramifications today and deep into China's future. An unexpected consequence is the effect on China's future prospects for growth, as they are constantly reminded of the consequences of attempting to artificially affect nature. When the People's Republic of China became the governing body, its leader, Mao Zedong, preached the importance of having as many children as possible. This provided Mao with a steady workforce to continue China's growth both industrially and agriculturally. As a result, China's population ballooned from 540 million in 1949 to 969 million in 1976. When Mao Zedong died in September of 1976, he was succeeded by Deng Xiaoping, who noticed a startling problem. China was approaching its carrying capacity, meaning if they continued with their rapid level of population growth, they would hinder their economic prosperity and put major strains on not only their environmental but also their natural resources. In order to solve this issue, in 1979, Xiaoping implemented the one-child policy, limiting Chinese families to only have one child. This policy was enforced through routine pregnancy checks, financial incentives for families who followed the rules, forced abortions, sterilizations, and heavy fines. The fines would range anywhere from 2,400 yuan to 85,000 yuan, which was many more times than most Chinese households made in a single year. The policy had immediate effects, however, as the fertility rate plummeted, as we see in the graph. It dropped from 6.4 at its highest in the mid-60s, all the way down to 1.5 in the early 2000s when the policy was well underway. Yang Fang Lao. This Chinese phrase means raise children to provide for old age. It is customary throughout China's history that male children would grow up and take care of their parents who raised them. In a typical Chinese household, you will have 3 generations living together. This became incredibly troublesome when the one-child policy was implemented, as the eldest son usually had the responsibility of taking care of his parents when he grew up. This put tremendous pressure on families to produce a son, and families would go often to the extremes to have one. This resulted in sex-based abortions, infanticide, and abandoning female infants. It also created a huge gender disparity between males and females that will be discussed later. And here we are. Oh, whoops, that's the wrong photo. There we go. That's better. In 2015, the Chinese Communist Party lifted the one-child policy, and in its place, they enacted a two-child policy. China had hoped that its people would use this new policy, and that birth weights would rise. And while initially this was the case, as we see from the chart, birth rates have again dropped to the lowest level in over 20 years. The reason being that while Chinese people are able to have a second child, most can only afford to raise one. Also, while China changed its policy, they failed to provide additional family support to help lower income families raise another child. So while some families would like to raise a second child, they simply cannot. This is also troubling when you consider that a bulk of China's population are those lower income families. China's gender disparity. As a result of the one-child policy and China's cultural norms, there are many more males than females. There are over 36 million more males than females in China. This is a greater disparity than any other country in the world. Many think the true number is much greater than the official government statistics. This has made it increasingly difficult for men to meet a compatible partner and have children. There are often several villages where there are no women to be found. As we see from the graph, while the disparity is declining slightly, it is still much higher than the global average, highlighting that the problem will remain for years to come. This massive imbalance further reduces the birth rate and puts serious economic pressure on the future Chinese economy. China's elderly woes. China's life expectancy is the highest it's ever been in its history at 76 years. Coupled with low fertility rates and more elderly / soon-to-be elderly people than ever before, the depleted younger population will be saddled with a tremendous amount of financial pressure. Chinese male children will not only have to take care of their parents, but also their aging grandparents, putting an enormous financial strain on the average household. As a consequence, even more pressure will be put on the birth rate and the overall economy. As this younger generation will be the only people working, they will also have to shoulder the burden of heavy taxes. And as we see from the graph, it shows how the age split has shifted. In 2050, older people in the 50s and 60s will far outnumber people who are younger. So, China's future population outlook. The one-child policy, while invented to help their economy, could actually now decimate its unprecedented growth. Although it was started in 1979 and ended in 2015, its effects will be felt far into China's future. Due to the great gender imbalance, a higher life expectancy, with an extremely large elderly population and a dwindling fertility rate, China's overall population is expected to decline and to enter into an irreversible decline. Their population is expected to peak in 2030 and then enter into a state of decline by 2100. And as we can see from the graph, they will peak at 1.4 billion, and by 2100 that number will drop to 1 billion. With a large non-working population and a smaller pool of able-bodied workers, labor will be much more expensive. As a result, China's powerful and profitable manufacturing sector will likely face several roadblocks, and its status as the manufacturing engine of the global economy will stutter. The one-child policy debacle teaches us that humans should not attempt to grasp and control nature's reins. As shown through China's dire future outlook, we cannot aspire to control something that we do not fully understand. We can only hope that China's failures will instruct the rest of the world and future generations that it is better to let nature take its course, or else suffer the consequences that come with it. And here are my sources. Thank you for listening.